Good,
Good, af-
good
good
evening.
evening.
I was
I
going to
was
say
going to
good
say good
afternoon.
afternoon.
I know. Good evening, Steve.
Good
Good
evening,
evening,
Susan.
Susan.
How are
How
you?
are you?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Enjoying a slight move to autumn now. It's getting very clear, and for a lot of people, the children will be back at school, if not already any day now. So, different vibe in the towns, isn't there, really?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really
it's really
quiet at
quiet at
Bowen
our end
when all the
when all
kids
the
have
kids
gone
have
back to
gone back
school.
to school.
I love
I
it.
love
I
Absolutely.
it.
love
I
it.
love
It's
it. It's
quiet now.
quiet now.
Anyway,
Anyway,
what are we
what are we
talking about
talking about
tonight?
tonight?
We're talking about divorce and how divorce is such an everyday aspect in everyday life that it impacts on most of us in some shape or form, but we also need to be thinking about the impact on our mental health as well. So we thought we might put those two things together, how we cope with divorce and how we protect ourselves and our mental health when we're going through a fairly tumultuous time.
Great.
Great.
How does
How does
divorce
divorce
affect our
affect our
mental health?
mental health?
Well, I think for a lot of people, I mean, there's two different camps with this because there are some people who perhaps thought their relationship was fine, everything was hunky dory, they didn't necessarily think anything was wrong, they may have thought they were going through a bit of stress intermittently, but overall thought their relationship was fine. There are other people who perhaps have been putting up with feeling down and fed up and increasingly jaded. And I think the problem with divorce is that sometimes people lose the ability to communicate effectively, and as a consequence of that, they perhaps end up really feeling quite down on themselves, wondering whether they are, in some way inadequate, perhaps feeling a failure, perhaps feeling that they've let down family or friends. So there can be all sorts of elements, all sorts of different components, and how those do impact on our mental health and how we feel about ourselves as a consequence of a relationship that we most certainly hoped would last forever. As that comes to an end, it can be very, very wearing, very debilitating, very stressful for us to manage and protect ourselves through.
Especially when
Especially
you've
when
got a
you've got
family, isn't
family,
it?
isn't it?
Well, I think if children are involved, it does make it extra complicated because there's often more serious financial implications, childcare implications, where you're going to live implications, whether you're moving school, what about access? Will both parents still be able to factor in the children's lives? So there are definitely other layers involved. And also, parents don't always want to include their children in their deliberations. So children may be excluded from some of the conversations, quite rightly so, if they're very young. But it can be that we keep our feelings to ourselves and we are perhaps going through things and having to keep a stiff upper lip and keep a smile on our face and appear to have everything normal when it very evidently is not. So yes, children can add extra layers of complication and restraint sometimes to a difficult time.
Trouble is,
Trouble
some
is, some
children are
children are
so
so
clever.
clever.
They know
They
what's
know what's
going on,
going
don't
on,
they?
don't they?
Yeah. I mean, I've said before when we've been chatting that something like 85-90% of communication is non-verbal, and children will intuitively pick up on an atmosphere, they'll pick up on tension, they'll pick up on undercurrents, they'll pick up on raised voices that go quiet when they enter the room or return home. And so they may not know exactly what's going on, but they will certainly know that things are not happy, things have changed. They may hear crying in another room, they may see the state of one of their parents or realise that, as one starts not being there as often, they can't work away all the time. And so it, depending on how involved they are, it's very impactful on children, absolutely.
So how
So
do
how do
one
one
survive
survive
mentally?
mentally?
I think there are a few things that we can do. I think one of them is very much about sharing how you're feeling with trusted, respected family, friends, people who you care about, maybe even a therapist or a religious counsellor of some description, but share how you're feeling and talk it through, but also be very aware that any advice that you get, those people giving you the advice are not necessarily going to follow it. I've heard countless times of people say, get rid of the so-and-so, he or she are awful, start off again, you're better off without them. But you know perfectly well, if they were in exactly the situation that you're in, they would be sticking it out. So it is very much about keeping your own counsel, getting support, sharing how you're feeling, having somebody whose shoulder you can perhaps cry on or who listens to you, but be prepared to take some restraint if you're given advice. And also respect that sometimes friends will say, shut up now, let's talk about something different. Because it can be that we get in a situation that every time we see our friends are going, another thing, and our friends are going, oh my goodness me, we're spending a whole evening talking about your trials and tribulations. Let's have some fresh air. And you too will benefit from having some time without being immersed in the detritus of your relationship as it collapses around you. So sometimes allow your friend to say, shut up, let's talk about something else, let's do something different, let's go for a walk, let's have a few beers or something and go out and have a night out where we're not always talking about things. So, but sharing how you're feeling, I think, is a good thing, because we feel most people will have had some difficulty in their relationships, even if they're not separating or splitting up. So, you know, allowing yourself to be reminded that you're not on your own, that other people have been where you are and recovered. So it can be quite therapeutic to have that someone who you can talk to, phone them up whenever you need to, sit at the bottom of the stairs with a brew and have a chat with somebody on the phone, or go out and see them. So that can be a very useful thing to do. So that's definitely one tip about coping and protecting yourself at this time.
Can divorce make you go crazy?
Pardon?
Can divorce make you go crazy?
I think some people will feel that they are crazy when they're going through divorce. Definitely, yes. Because it's agonising. Wondering what went wrong, wondering what I did, wondering could I have done something different? How come he or she doesn't understand me? Accepting that our partner feels very differently about us now. That the couple that I was talking with somebody only the other day, and I realised that one of the things that they had to confront was that they were not the same person who had got married way back in the day. So we may have been a youngish couple coming fresh out of college, university, starting out in life. We may have started our relationship in those early days, and over the years we've both changed. We've had children, grown a business, been promoted, had perhaps sickness in the family, maybe financial worries. So going through all of those different things, our priorities may have changed. We may be very different. It's coming to terms with the fact that whatever the time scale of your relationship, often our partners start to feel differently about us. We're not necessarily on our best behaviour when we get married any longer. We're not trying to impress somebody or keep them in our lives the same way that we might have done if we were dating or in the early days of playing house and living together. So accepting that our partner feels very differently about us can drive us crazy, because we're wondering, how do they not understand how I'm feeling? How's this gone so very badly wrong? What is it about me? What is it about them? I thought we were fine. So yes, we can definitely feel that we're going crazy, and then it's a time where we have to make so many decisions and choices. So there can be an awful lot of stress. There often is an awful lot of stress at a time when we're then having to make quite hasty decisions about where to move, about our finances, about whether we're going to stay in the family home, what are we going to do, you know, all those dilemmas that need sometimes fairly reasonably fast choices and decisions to be made. So very much we can feel that we can hardly cope and our head's going to explode at some point.
Yeah. And also, it's like a grieving period when you're separated.
Definitely agree with that. Definitely agree with that, because all the different 5-6 stages of grief, where we're going through anger, we're going through a negotiation, if only I'd done this, or he or she would have done that, you know, we could have been better or different. We're going through the down depression stage of, is it me, what's wrong with me, all those different levels of grieving where, and some people say it would have almost been easier if the other person would have died, because at least then you have a funeral, the matter's dealt with, and you don't see them driving down the road in a new car or out with a new person, or appearing to have friends on social media and having a whale of a time. So sometimes it can feel easier if they have actually died, even though it sounds harsh to say that, because we do come out the other side and recover. But definitely the end of all those dreams that we had, the end of all the hopes and expectations, perhaps a change of lifestyle that we have to grieve for, where perhaps we're having to change our criteria about working. We may have to quickly find a new job or a different job, leave our home, leave our beautiful garden perhaps. There can be lots of things that we're grieving for when we're going through a divorce, and it's very tough. And definitely there are lots of different stages where we go round and round in circles until we eventually reach a sort of acceptance and a, he or she didn't want to be with me, it's for the best. That was for a stage of my life. I learned a lot. I grew up. We actually hopefully get to a place where we appreciate what we had, but also then start saying, it's time to move on, time to look for something different, time to start anew afresh as the new me as I am today.
Yeah, and also when we go for divorce, we blame each other, don't we? We say, it's his fault, it's her fault.
Absolutely. I only did this because you did that. Oh yeah, but I only did that because your mother or your sister, or when we were at the works event or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I do counselling, relationship counselling for people, whether they are trying to reconcile and stay together, or when they're trying to break up but with a bit of dignity and mutual respect, when I'm doing that sort of counselling, I say, let's try to avoid that cycle of examples, because examples don't reconcile anything. All they do is keep churning over and over and over again arguments and discussions that you probably had countless times that never get you anywhere, that are not going to reconcile, because often people have two very different views. The actual story, the actual facts might be the same. We were at this place and this happened and these people were there. But people's interpretation, people's perspective of things is often very, very different. And that can never reconcile particularly. We may kind of understand somebody else's point of view, but it's often the case that we never fully agree with their interpretation of it, and devolving into endless loops, endless cycles of you said this, but I did that, and you did, doesn't actually get anybody anywhere, and just churns up old, unreconcilable disagreements and arguments, and it isn't worth it. It just keeps going on and on and on.
And when can we start going to the acceptance stage?
I think when we perhaps accept at some level that we have some responsibility for this too. I think we have to accept, even if the other person, I don't know, was absentee or angry a lot of the time or whatever, at some level we have to start saying, I should have got out earlier, or I should have said something sooner, or I should have sought help, or I should have called in, or I should have ended it sooner. At some level, when we start accepting that we have we have to take some ownership of what's gone on, our bit of the relationship. It might not be a genuine 50-50 blame or whatever, but we chose that person. We allowed certain behaviour to continue. We contributed in some ways. So in most cases, it is about we start moving on when we can accept responsibility for our part in that. And then when we perhaps start saying, okay, I now have to stop the grieving, stop the depressive cycle, stop the crying. What are my next steps going to be? And I think when we start becoming a bit more proactive, and maybe, if we've not worked up till now, maybe we've got ourselves some sort of job, even if it's a part-time or volunteering role, where we've started saying, okay, I'm going to perhaps tone up a few pounds, or get my hair cut at a different shop, or get some clothes, or change my image in some way, and not necessarily spend a lot of money, but start investing in ourselves again, and saying, even if there are children, even if there are other demands on myself and my time, I've got to start thinking about me. I've got to start taking a bit of time for myself. Maybe it's a Friday evening, 20-30 minutes having a leisurely bath, or shutting your bedroom door and having a read of a book, or sharing childcare with a friend so you get a few hours free one afternoon a week or something, but where you do things, where you start being a bit proactive, taking time for yourself, starting to feel better about yourself, starting to do things that help you feel better about yourself. I think they're the markers when we start allowing ourselves, we're not talking about dating again or anything like that, but just getting ourselves mobilized into being you again, into living a life of some shape, meaningful shape of your own again.
When is the right time for us to go back on the market again?
When we feel like it. And even then, it's a interesting criteria, because if I mean, a lot of people do online dating, and we don't. I mean, it's still it's a very popular way of meeting somebody, but it's also a very fraught way potentially of meeting people who are not suitable. So you might be meeting people who just want to hook up, which is another word for casual sex. That might suit you for a while, but be careful. Or you have to protect yourself and say, okay, I've got all this love that wasn't wanted by this person, let me give it to the next person. It's not called rebound for nothing. And so there is a sense of saying, take your time and maybe tentatively put your toe in the water. If you're going to meet somebody, enjoy it, but do it somewhere safe, somewhere public. Perhaps drive yourself in your own car so that you feel independent. Get a friend to phone you half an hour in to check that you're okay, or to give you an opportunity for making a quick getaway if you're not okay. But just if you're feeling like it, then decide what it is you're wanting. Are you just wanting to flex your muscles and get out there and have somebody look at you in that way again that's not happened for ages, or have somebody who gives you conversation and shows a bit of an interest in you, where you have a bit of a flirtation and feel good? But I think when you start feeling a bit better, or maybe do something as a co-dating thing with a friend, and you two meet up with them two and see how you go, or maybe just start going to places where people of the opposite sex go, clubs or sporting clubs, or meeting somebody of a similar interest, where you do it it's called organically, where you perhaps are at the same tennis club or the same gym, or you're walking at the same time every day and you see similar faces, and gradually exchange a nod and a smile and a few words, and then maybe agree to meet for coffee. So all these things can be ways of tentatively putting your toe in the water and finding somebody who is compatible, who you feel you might have some sort of affinity with, and maybe enjoy just taking it a little bit further. And that might only be for a coffee or going to a theatre or something, but that might be okay, just to tentatively feel attractive and good about yourself again in your own time.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about, time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Very much so, yes.
Because sometimes we rush into relationships one after another to be kind of like make someone jealous, or because we've been used to not being alone all the time.
Yeah, and some people don't feel complete unless they're in a relationship. What am I going to do? I haven't got somebody there. And I think that in itself can be a really useful piece of information for us to look at ourselves and go, hang on a minute, let me address what this is all about. What can I do to start feeling a bit more confident as a person in my own right? And that might be doing a night school class. It might be doing, as I say, volunteering. It might be joining a gym, where we start realising that we can go to places on our own, do things on our own, feel good about ourselves. And maybe then we actually organically meet somebody who we smile at and have a bit of a chat with and a few words with, and gradually discover that we could possibly take that a little bit further. And that in itself can be useful and important for us to do.
Yeah. And the last bit, if people are listening now and going for a divorce, what would you say to them?
I would say that, I don't know who said it, but it's a very famous phrase, this too will pass. And I think that is an important thing to think about, that no matter how bad you're feeling, how low you're feeling, how unattractive, how isolated, how nobody feels like me, or nobody's been through this as well, this too will pass. And that whole thing about sharing how you're feeling, accepting that your partner feels very differently about you, don't allow yourself to be pushed into quick decisions. Take your time and do things that support you. But be kind to yourself. I think that's the thing. This too will pass, and be kind to yourself throughout this time.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, that was very good, Susan. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Divorce can be extremely damaging, guys, for your well-being. Yes, we have all our ups and downs. We get divorced, relationships don't work, there's children involved. But when we go through that healing process and things move on, just remember, all we have to do is be kind and love one another. Good night.